Good morning, boys and girls. Marshall Gregory Thomas, your host here at the 28th Amendment Tiny Concert Series. Today is May 9th, 1919, Thursday, glorious day, beautiful day here in the great Northwest. Give you an unplugged concert today. We'll go back to the electric tomorrow. It's just I haven't picked up this guitar in probably going on a year, and I haven't played a lot of these songs in probably about almost 2 years. So why not do a live broadcast and see if you can remember them? So I'll be reading my lyrics here. And first what I'd like to do is I'd like to read a selection from, yesterday we talked about, we read, pardon me. Really got to focus here. Yesterday we read an excerpt from Martin Luther King, the late Dr. King's speech. A Time for Leaving was, I guess, what the speech was called. And it was the moment in April 4th of 1967 when the late Dr. King turned away from LBJ's war in Vietnam. And so today we're going to read an excerpt from a little earlier, I'm guessing 1953, and this is an excerpt from a speech from Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was president at the time, who was essentially the Supreme Allied Commander beginning in 1942, and essentially was given much of the credit for the United States victory in Europe in World War II. And that propelled him into the presidency in 1950. So he's confronting a Cold War, and I have a song request, okay? All right. I appreciate that. You have a song request, but I'm going to just do the one unplugged today, but I'll make you a promise. I will take request. Kip's Bouncy Sesh on SoundCloud for me, please. Wow. Okay, well, I'll look that up. Let me write that down real quick. Hang on a second. I apologize. Moving kind of slow today. In all honesty, I'm in the middle of a fast. Kip's Bouncy on SoundCloud. Okay. Well, always want to give the people what they want, and I'll have to look that one up. I have no idea what that is, and we'll see if I can do my version, my interpretation of that one. Sure, I'd be glad to. Thank you for the input. So this is Dwight D. Eisenhower speaking in the depths of the Cold War. Now, essentially, this was a massive arms race in nuclear weapons primarily. But you have to remember that Joseph Stalin he's invaded and taken over Eastern Europe. And 6 years earlier, Churchill has given his Iron Curtain speech in Fulton, Missouri, and he's described, the Iron Curtain essentially, an intractable struggle between East and West, between communism and democracy. And so Eisenhower's in the thick of it now. It's 1953. Both sides are in this tremendous arms race with nuclear weapons. And he's making an appeal. And essentially he's sending out you know, like a dog whistle. He's trying to reach the other side and get them to come to the table, which he had done multiple times. You know, he doesn't want to waste the massive amounts of American wealth on an arms race in nuclear and conventional weapons. So this is Eisenhower, who's seen more war than probably just about anyone alive at that point. Okay. This is called a cross of iron speech. What can the world or any nation in it hope for if no turning is found on this dread road? The worst to be feared and the best to be expected can be stated, simply stated. The worst is war. The best is a cold war, a war that brings a life of perpetual fear and tension. A burden of arms draining the wealth and the labor of all peoples, a wasting of strength that defies the American system or the Soviet system or any system to achieve true abundance and happiness for the peoples of this earth. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities. It is 2 electric power plants, each serving a town of 60,000 people. It is 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals. It is 50 miles of concrete highway. We pay for a single fighter with 500,000 bushels of wheat. We pay for a single destroyer with new homes that could have housed more than 8,000 people. This, I repeat, is the best way of life to be found on the road that has been taken. The road the world has been taking. This is not a way of life at all, in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron. These plain and cruel truths define the peril and point the hope that come with this spring. It is a moment that calls upon the governments of the world to speak their intentions with simplicity and with honesty. It calls upon them to answer the questions that stir the hearts of all sane men. Is there no other way the world can live? So that was Dwight D. Eisenhower, and historians have gone back and taken a second look at this guy, and he was actually doing a lot below the radar. In other words, he's doing a lot of things behind the scenes that weren't public. So publicly he has a rather pedestrian, ordinary presidency, but you know, just under the surface he's just paddling like mad, you know. And so they've revised their they've reevaluated him, and he's actually one of the more effective and one of the more active, dynamic presidencies of the 20th century. And I always thought the 50s was kind of a mundane, lost generation, but the times that happen right before you're born are those times that you know least of. You understand the least. And that was definitely the case with like an Eisenhower or Kennedy kind of thing. So we're going to have our tiny little concert here, yeah, let's just dive into that. Yeah, I'm on my hands are shaking. I'm on a fast, and basically 0 food. It's like coffee and water. It's getting kind of intense. It's getting really intense. No blood sugar in my body whatsoever. Let's see if I can get it kind of off the ceiling. And enjoy the decor of the music bunker here. We got the obligatory vent and the obligatory smoke detector and a door, and Ron, who's always on my shoulder. My voice might not cooperate on this one. I apologize in advance. 3 brothers gone to war, made a secret pact. Blood money buys the land, they could not be back. If one comes to harm those that live, we'll buy the farm and lay our bones there to rest on the mountain we love best, with the dead benefit, with the dead benefit. Lay it down for old glory. Lay it down for our God. Lay it down for, lay it down for the hometown. It's my home right or wrong. It's my home right or wrong. Though there's money changes in the temple, though there's lights sitting on the throne, though our glory days are gone forever, I'll still come when the trumpet calls. I'll still tend to tear fall. I return from the wars, veteran of fortunes, my home, a stranger's face, lost in this familiar place. Fortune has turned her back on me. I long return home. Both my brothers are all gone. I long lit fire on my brother's funeral pyre. Fallen heroes, funerals higher. Lay it down for old glory. Lay it down for our God. Lay it down for hometown. It's my home right or wrong. It's my home right long. Though there's money changes in the temple, though there's light sitting on the throne, though her glory days are gone forever, I'll still come when the trumpet calls. I'll still pretend till the fall. How much should I sacrifice? All they ever said to me was more. Lay it down for old glory. Lay it down for our God. Lay it down for hometown. It's my home right long. It's my home right long. She's my country. She's my country right long. She's my country. She's my country right long. Wow. Okay, well, the voice. Ooh. Don't drop the guitar, please. The voice was half there. Of course, if you're scoring that's a 50 on your test, you just flunked. Oh, wow. I seem to be dropping everything. Yeah, this is one of those days you go through, and when you don't fall down and poop on yourself, you feel like you really accomplished something. Oh my goodness. Struggle, struggle, struggle. Okay, we're probably going to have a short, tiny concert here in the music bunker today. So the 28th Amendment is essentially, it's changing, basically changing, fundamentally changing our political system. And it's taking the money out of the hands of the special interests and the private hands, and we're putting the money into the hands of the voters, into the public funding of elections. So our politicians are not loyal to the voters. Our politicians are loyal to their contributors. And so, we can blame the politicians all we want, but, this is the system as it is. This is the ocean they swim in. Okay, so they spend most of their time fundraising and getting schmoozed by millionaires and billionaires and these lobbyists. And I forgot, I used to live in that town, and I would go down on K Street, and, that's kind of, it's like a funnel, where all the money from all, not just the United States, but all over the world, the Chinese Communist Party, the Saudis, the Russian oligarchs, all this money is pouring into K Street. Some really nefarious not just American private, interest, of ConAgra or people, or General Dynamics or people like that. I mean, people, this money is coming from everywhere, and it's really corrupted the system now. Several decades ago, all these think tanks, were formed, and these are people who are purportedly experts. A lot of them are certainly, and they come on TV and they give you their honest opinion of what's really going on behind the scenes. Well, now, within the last 10 years, a lot of these think tanks are being funded by some of the same money that's pouring into K Street. So unless, you have somebody that comes on, the chatterbox, and they say, I'm an expert from this think tank, and, oh, okay, well, tell us what's going on. A lot of these people are being funded, these think tanks are being funded by the same people who are funding K Street. So, and they won't necessarily lie straight out to you, but there's a void there. It's kind of like there's an elephant in the room and we're not going to talk about it kind of effect. So you're not getting the whole story. And, like I said, I lived in that town for years and worked there. And I would go into these committees and say there's something going on in Haiti, or something's blowing up, over here in South America or over in Africa. And I go down there and I sit in the committee, and you have the State Department people come in and testify, before the Foreign Affairs Committee. And you have experts come in, and if you have to, and there's an old phrase, it's called the dog and pony show. And so you have to sit there for like 3 or sometimes 4 hours, and then finally someone will come into the room and they'll sit down and they'll testify, and voila, the truth, you start hearing something that rings true. So everything that came before is kind of, it's very stilted, and it's very, it's the elephant in the room effect, or it's called a dog and pony show. Essentially, they're telling the senators and the congressmen what they want to hear. And in fact, they're essentially misleading or lying to them. And the senators and the congressmen actually want to be lied to. That way they can vote the way that their contributors want them to vote. So this is kind of a Pontius Pilate kind of thing, They get told lies, and this facilitates their mistakes. And so I'm in the room, and if you do wait 3 or 4 hours, I mean, you're literally you're falling out of your chair at this point. But someone will come into the room and they'll start talking about the situation, what's going on, and say Africa, or in this case Venezuela or something. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, this guy is spitting truth, it's coming out. And this whole time the senators or the congressmen are coming in the room and then leaving, coming in the room. And, they're voting on and they're doing lots of things. And so it's kind of like, it's helicoptering in and asking some questions and getting some answers and helicoptering out kind of thing. And it's kind of a drive-by government. And it's really not working for us. And certainly economically for the past 30 years, it's been a complete disaster for the working class. So the 28th Amendment is going to, it's going to free these people up, the 500, our senators, our 435 congressmen, and our 100 senators. It's going to free them up from spending most of their time is taken up in fundraising, and it's going to allow them to do their jobs more effectively and to represent the people who voted for them and not the people who are funding them. And we can blame them all we want, but on some level, it's really our fault for letting this system evolve and perpetuate. So the 28th Amendment, what we've got is, we've got the Bernie voters and we've got the Trump voters. And what we want to do is bring the two peasant revolts together. And so for the left, for the Bernie bros, we got the ERA, that's the Equal Rights Amendment. They trotted this out, 35, actually in the early 70s, I guess. Okay, it's been a long time. They trotted this out, and it got almost to the threshold, and then they were afraid that they would have to spend a lot of money and give women equal pay. It's kind of a moot point at this. So why even bother with the Equal Rights Amendment for women? Well, you make a lot of progress in society, but let's say, just for argument's sake, theoretically, let's think of a theoretical occurrence. What if some reactionary kind of authoritarian, quasi-dictatorial personality gets elected president? What if this president puts a lot of reactionary, right-wing ideologues stacks the Supreme Court with these people? Mm-hmm. And what if a lot of this, a lot of the progress that women have made is codified in law, but it can be reversed by the Supreme Court if it so chooses. So how do you solidify these gains? How do you lock this in? A constitutional amendment is the only way to trump the Supreme Court, no pun intended. So, the Equal Rights Amendment, as it was originally written for all intents and purposes, is part of the 28th Amendment, one component. A second component for the left, for the Bernie bros, is gay rights. And just be very short and sweet, just very much like the civil rights bills. And so it'll codify gay rights. And then the courts can, jostle in the aftermath about what constitutes equal treatment of gay people. So it'll go back and forth, but the concept will be solidified for all time in the Constitution, written, carved in stone. So there may be some, back and forth, but it'll be within the confines of these people are entitled to equal rights under the Constitution, just like the civil rights movement functioned. And then what we need to do is we need to bring the Trump voters in on board. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have sensible, common sense gun rights. So now we've got the Second Amendment, so why bother? Well, the Second Amendment, they're arguing back and forth. Well, the Second Amendment was about establishing a militia before there was a standing army, and we're talking about flintlock muskets. And we're just talking about the citizenry being armed so they can be immediately called up to repulse, the British or whoever. And so this doesn't pertain to now, and it's not talking about, it's talking about establishing a militia more than it's talking about people have the right to bear arms. So on the, it's being worn away, the Second Amendment. And it's been very effective, and it's being further worn away. So what if some left-wing ideologue gets to be president? I don't know. I mean, any number of the current Democratic candidates for president, several come to mind. Cory Booker, Kamala Harris are talking about banning weapons, and it's kind of a slippery slope once you ban one type or long guns or we're only going to have shotguns and deer rifles, and then it kind of dominoes. So the concept is to solidify gun rights, within a framework that says, no crazy people, no felons, that kind of thing. I mean, some of the strongest gun laws in the world are in a place like Mexico, and 300,000 people have been murdered in the cartel violence, almost exclusively by firearms. So, passing a law only works if people decide to obey the law. And Chicago, these are all illegal guns that kill 500, almost 500, young black men and whoever innocent bystanders are standing nearby a year. So, it's a free fire zone. It's a war zone. Chirac, Chicago. And they've got strong gun laws. So just passing a law doesn't mean you're going to, well, we're going to have a peaceful society. Tranquility will not reign just because we pass a law banning guns. It just means people who are willing to break the law in the first place will have guns. Well, at least that's my take on it. I apologize. If you think something different, it's your country too. You're entitled to your opinion, so I'm willing to listen. To anyone who wants to discourse, in a thoughtful and reasonable manner. So, but anyway, the Second Amendment, no criminals, no crazies, history of violence, mentally insane, drug addicts. You lose, you beat up your wife, you lose your guns, kind of thing. And, but, okay, how about, just like you get a driver's license, you should go in and, pass a skills test, like the driving test. It shouldn't be any harder than driving a car. So you do the written, then you go out back of the gun and you pass, a gun safety test. They give it to you in the Boy Scouts when you get your merit badge. I did that, so it's not that hard. And so it's like, the ability to drive a car. So in the same place virtually, so it's not really expensive to implement this. And people are going to be paranoid. Oh, I had to get a license done it. Well, it's in the Constitution. You're entitled to it. Now, if you want to buy some heavy artillery like an AR-15 or something that resembles, something that resembles a military weapon, what they did in the 30s was they said, okay, you can own a Thompson submachine gun, but the FBI wanted to exert pressure on downward pressure on this, but you have to essentially pay like $200 or $300 a year tax in order to own this, like it's a military weapon, It's called a broom sweeper. It's for like, 45, here come like, I forgot how big the clip was. It's a drum. It's also, okay, so 30 or 50 rounds, you sweep a trench or something. It's not very accurate beyond like 50 or 80 feet at all. So it's a close-in weapon. But the Thompson submachine gun was like the must-have machine gun of the day in the 30s. So they said, okay, you can own a Thompson submachine gun, but every year you essentially have to pay like about, it costs like $500 or $300. So the tax was like $200 or $300 just to own this, every year to own this gun. So you really have to want to own one of these things to pay, 1930s to pay like $200 or $300. So if you want to own an AR-15 or a semi-automatic AK or whatever, I don't know what people own these days. Really, I've owned like I've bought like one gun in my life. So but I support the Second Amendment within reason. I would just like to see fewer criminals and crazies have the guns. So, okay, so if you want to buy some of these upscale weapons that people are kind of upset about now, well, okay, sure. Pay if the weapon costs what's an AR-15 costs, $500, $1,000. I have no idea. So you pay a tax of like $500 a year or $300 a year to keep your AR-15. This will put downward pressure. So just common sense kind of stuff. But essentially, it will solidify the Second Amendment, carved in stone. Okay, and people who support the Second Amendment think, oh, well, all we have to do is defend this. Well, you can't defend the Second Amendment because it's open for interpretation. That means eventually somebody's going to get in power, like a Cory Booker or Kamala Harris or whoever, and they're going to start chipping away very, very rapidly at this, and before you know it, you're going to be, up the creek. So it's very important to have this as part of the 28th Amendment, to bring these Trump voters along, and to also to inject a little common sense into the concept of gun ownership as well. And also another component for the right, for the Trump rural working class voters, is immigration reform, specifically revoking birthright citizenship. Everywhere in the Western civilization and practically in the world, if you come across the border and you have a child, it doesn't mean that the child is automatically a citizen of that country. It's just about practically only here that we have that law. And it was actually written, the person who wrote it stood up in Congress, 160 years ago and said, this does not mean that people can just come into this country and become citizens. So the intent of this was to give citizenship to former slaves, to African Americans, okay, to Black Americans. Sorry, we're PC free here. So this was, just like the welfare state, this was set up. The 14th, the 14th Amendment, I'm maybe wrong here, was set up for Black Americans to make sure that they have full citizenship. This was not envisioned, and the person who wrote this stood up and say, we're not envisioning, this does not apply this other way. And of course, we've been applying it that way for several generations now. So this will revoke birthright citizenship, just like everywhere else in the world. If one of the parents is an American citizen, a native-born citizen, and they have a child, then that child is granted American citizenship. But one of the parents has to be an American citizen. Okay, so revoking birthright citizenship. Fairly moderate, really. It conforms to what most of the rest of the world does. Okay, and then finally, public financing of elections. So, in this way, it's a sea change really in our politics. And what we have now, everything that's going wrong in this country for the last 30 years can be chalked up to this concept of special interest money coming into the political process, and what you have is private profit and public expense. So, you have corporations making, and businesses and individuals making money while the taxpayer is losing out, and you see this all across the board, and it affects every walk of life. And virtually every single one of the things that is really hurting this country right now, and has been for decades, can be traced back to this fundamental problem that the American system is an oligarchy with legalized bribery at its core. And so what we're going to do with the 28th Amendment is flip the script. We're going to fundamentally change this dynamic. And this will be a sea change because this will allow just an entire spectrum of reforms to take place. What kind of reforms are we envisioning? Well, we're talking about bringing back the working class and the middle class, specifically the middle class. The middle class was always, the ballast in the ship, and it kept our politics from swinging too far to the left or right, but it also, it was really the nuts and bolts of democracy. As long as we had a strong middle class, this republic was stronger than it had ever been. It was really secure. And so what we're talking about is a series of reforms to help the working class, but specifically the middle class. And we're talking about so what we're replicating is essentially the economics that created the middle class in post-World War II America. So 1945, say the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, we saw this incredible standard of living created in this vast, wide and deep middle class. The middle 50% of our population had this wonderful standard of living and this really great wage scale. And contrary to some public opinions and some political statements, we can bring this back. What we need to do, and it also comes with it, is a psychology and a state of well-being and happiness that we're missing here today. And it's undermining the republic. So what we're talking about, the conditions and the laws that brought about the American middle class in post-World War II America was the 1935 Banking Act, better known as Glass-Steagall, the this put a little sanity. It ensured that 1929 stock market crash would not be repeated continually. And they revoked this under Clinton, and since then we've had 2000, the dot-com bubble, which was an engineered fraud, and we've had 2008, the credit default swap, which essentially brought down the entire world economy to, a $65 trillion fraud. And this is just going to keep happening. It's just a repeating theme. Now, why is this happening? Well, what's happening is, pardon me, you can only invent so many airplanes, so many telephones, so many, rockets. You make a lot of money from these inventions, but they're finite. And, you get decreasing returns on each, each innovation. So right now it's 3D printing or that kind of thing. That's a new kind of technology. You've invented something new and it has really limitless possibilities. That's fantastic. But there's only so many of these inventions within an economy. However, if you want to commit these kind of frauds or scams, there is an infinite number of financial, frauds and scams that you can contemplate, conceive, and execute. So if you're just looking to create, your own personal wealth within this system, you don't have to go out and invent 3D printing. You can just come up with a new scam involving banking or commodities or insurance and I'll give you just a brief example. Excuse me, I'm going to get some water. I apologize. What's a fraud that's happened recently? Well, let's look at Puerto Rico. This is in real time what's happening. Puerto Rico has run up hundreds of, it's a very small, not a very big population. And it's a state, but it's not a state kind of thing. And it's part of America, but it's not part of America kind of thing. I don't think they can make up their mind. They get the benefits of being part of America, but they don't pay federal income tax, for instance. So they have all of the good without any of the bad. Okay. What's going on in Puerto Rico? Well, Puerto Rico has run up these incredible debts, and they have no relation to anything that should be happening on the island. If you run up hundreds of billions or even, $500 billion of debt in a very small island with a very small population, where did the money go? Their schools are shutting down. Their utilities are antiquated, their water treatment, their electrical grid. It's like a failed state there. Where did the $500 billion go? It's a giant fraud. The people, these hedge funds or these fraudsters, these banksters, these Wall Street criminals have loaned $500 billion. I'm not sure about the exact amount, but it's hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars to this fraudulent political class in Puerto Rico. Where did the money go? They have nothing to show for it. It was stolen. Okay, well now their debt is astronomical. They can never hope to repay it. They can't even pay the interest on the debt. So the American taxpayer is supposed to come in and bail out this state that is not a state to the tune of $500 billion or $1 trillion. This is a giant fraud, and you see this again and again. In Argentina, there were these nefarious loans to this. They were obviously going bankrupt, and then they used the legal system to extract to 2 or 3 times their original loan or profit. So it's very, you're loaning money to failing regimes on purpose because the U.S. court system is not going to let these Argentina back into the international banking system unless they give you 3 times the money you loaned them. So this is a very calculated move. We're seeing this in Venezuela. What happened about a year ago? Wall Street loaned them like $2 or $3 billion. they were starting to collapse. It was before, it was before Russia and these other, mafia-like governments stepped in and tried to prop them up. I mean, the Chinese were already there, but these people a year ago, they were already in free fall. What happened? So a hedge fund or some, Wall Street interest came into the country and loaned them several $billion. Who in their right mind would do that? Someone who did the same thing to Argentina, who knows that they're going to use the legal system to extract, 3 times damages, essentially, from this criminal regime. They're giving money to our enemies because they know that they can make 3 times, 300% profit at some later date. And you're seeing a lot of this in all aspects of life. It's essentially, people are very intelligent, very, very widely, well-informed, well-read people are using the system, and they're essentially coming up with these. It's virtually unlimited the number of frauds you can come up with. So rather than investing in 3D printing, rather than investing in Main Street, it's easier to speculate on currencies. It's easier to try and extract money, to commit these giant frauds with, for instance, with Puerto Rico. And, it's private profit, public expense. So the U.S. taxpayer on some level is going to be stuck with the bill. And you're seeing this in all these different aspects of life, in the healthcare industry, in pharmaceuticals, in the defense industry, in the welfare state. So there's an infinite number of scams, and they're going down right now. And of course, the media is owned by these corporate interests and muzzled by them, so they're not about to delve into this. When was the last time you saw some really hard-hitting investigative reporting? All they do is sit around all day and interview each other, about the election that's 2 or 3 years away. This is, speaking of dog and pony shows, that's all this is. So you're not being served by the press. They're not going to help you out. So it's imperative that we pass the 28th Amendment. So Glass-Steagall is one aspect of what created this tremendous period of wealth and dynamic, economic, political stability, domestic tranquility, productivity, creativity, and just an explosion of creativity and wealth, and a sense of emotional and spiritual well-being. That we've lost this. So Glass-Steagall, the Wagner Act gave legal advantages to unions. Just think of it abstractly as a way of giving, of legalizing once and for all and codifying unions. So the union movement essentially created the middle class in this country. The 1924 Immigration Act, which essentially, tamped down the spigot of this mass immigration that had been going on since the 1880s from Eastern and Southern Europe. So 60 million or more people came in and went into the cities in the East and worked in the factories and the garment industry and the mines and what have you. And this was low-wage slave labor. And so the 1924 Immigration Act stopped this mass immigration of low-skilled workers. And so these people assimilated into American society. And these were Christians from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe who had been part of Christian Europe, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, part of European Western civilization. And so, but even then, it took like 100 years to fully assimilate the Italians and the Czechs and the Hungarians and the Bulgarians and these people from Eastern Europe. This was not an easy process, even though they already had, a common heritage. The Reformation, to a lesser degree the Enlightenment, but certainly a part of Christian Europe. So the 1924 Immigration Act stopped the mass immigration of low and unskilled labor. So the Sherman Antitrust Act was used a lot, most famously by Teddy Roosevelt, but it was also used to keep the larger companies in the line. Now, at this time, 1 in every 3 jobs was a manufacturing jobs. These are typically higher wage jobs. And so, you know, you want to aim for something like that. You know, you want to aim for a certain percentage of our workforce to be employed in manufacturing. And after World War II, something that was very successful in Germany was these employee-owned corporations. They're not so much employee-owned, it's just that the employees and the management had the same interest. You know, there was the way it was set up, it wasn't just run, it wasn't an adversarial system, pardon me, between the management and the employees always butting heads like it is here in this country. It was actually a cooperative, mutually interested way of running corporate Germany. And it's worked very well because Germany is the economic powerhouse of Europe and has been for quite some time, really. So maybe a quasi-employee-owned model might be more advantageous to workers. Now, historically, all through American history, we averaged tariffs of 24% from beginning to end to the present. So, you know, people talk about tariffs as something bad or it's going to set off these catastrophic economic conditions of the world. Well, these are people who are self-interested in this situation, okay? So tariffs have always been an integral part of the American economy as a way of maintaining our manufacturing base and our workforce. And so I think this is important, and we should contemplate 25% tariffs, at least upon those industries and markets where we feel like we have very much a self-interest in maintaining some level of domestic production. Now, you could go to a 50-50 rule, say that, you know, 50% of the cars sold in the United States have to be made here. So after, you know, gross demand, let's say gross demand of cars in the United States is 2 million vehicles a year. So after 1 million vehicles are imported, you know, the next all the rest of them are taxed at, you know, 25 or 50%, kind of to protect, you know, 50% of the demand, guard 50% of the demand for domestic production kind of concept. You could do this for certain kinds of electronics, computers. We invented this stuff, and our sending it, you know, our industrial production, manufacturing capability to southern China has been economic and a strategic disaster. It's helped some people, you know. Some people have done very well, but it's destroyed the working class, and the middle class is spiraling in, very much so. They're not going to discuss this, you know, on television because everything's wonderful and the free trade mantra is what they're selling. But these are very, very powerful, you know, entities, corporations, transnational corporations. Their loyalty is not to the United States of America, certainly not to the working class or the middle class of the United States. Now, you know, we tax wealth, and Senator Bradley wrote a book quite some time ago about a new tax system. Essentially, you know, we tax wealth. I said, we tax work. I apologize. I'm going to have to wrap this up in a few minutes. I seem to be really struggling today, but apparently I'm no longer a morning person. I apologize. I'm having trouble with my voice. Sorry about that. Okay, so we should go to a flat tax and a VAT tax. A flat tax is just 20%. Who owes 20%? Everyone. All right. Why? Because it's simple, it's easy. You don't need a vast bureaucracy to enforce this. Either you paid your 20% or you didn't. Anything over 20% is slavery. Okay? This was the historical norm all through Western civilization. It's called the Royal Fifth, 20% flat tax. Even on all the way down, you know, on virtually everybody. Okay? What about the wealthy? Inheritance tax. Okay. I make $100 billion. I grow old. I'm happy. I want to give it to my son. You can't. I want to flee the country and hide it. You can't. Okay, what about my kids? Each one of your children receives $20 million inheritance, and your wife. So they can basically, just even if they only earn 10% a year, they can make $2 million a year. Okay. If you can't live on $2 million a year, there's something wrong with you. All right. So it doesn't lock up all the wealth in these great houses, and they don't hand off their wealth and their political influence and their political power and their political offices. This is what kills empires. This is what kills nations and civilizations, is this process of all this wealth and power collecting into the hands of a few. And it's a natural function of capitalism and of an empire. It's what destroyed the Ottoman Empire. It's what destroyed, in some respects, the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was also destroyed by a burgeoning bureaucracy and a runaway military. And the army grew to an unmanageable size as well. But part of it was, the French Revolution. The aristocracy had gotten all the wealth and the political power, and it had crowded out the economic life of the people. The British Empire, well, the aristocracy, the power elite, owned like 80% of the arable land in the country, So they're crowding everybody else out of the economy. So, a flat tax of 20% and a robust inheritance tax. So my $100 billion goes back to the government, and it's spent hopefully wisely. If I want to set up a vast nature preserve, under my name down by the equator or something, or out west, that's probably okay. Okay, we did tariffs, VAT tax. All of our competitors have a VAT tax. Their corporations don't spend any money on insuring their workers. They don't have to pay for when their workers' kids' teeth need braces. Okay, our corporations do. It's an unequal playing field. So, really struggling. I apologize. So that's Canadian healthcare. It takes the expense of insuring our workers out of the, it's like being in a horse race and you're carrying 50 pounds and the other horse isn't. It's just not fair. So it'll give our corporations some relief. A VAT tax, all of our competitors have a VAT tax. For essentially, like, for instance, Germany. We want to sell Germany something, like a plane. It comes in. We have to pay their VAT tax, 18%. Wow. So it's like a tariff. So on top of our 25% tariffs, we could have a VAT tax of 10 or 20%. I would say 10% to start out with. And instead of taxing labor, I work and then I have to pay tax on what I earn, we tax consumption. So I buy something, I buy a beer, I pay a 10%, so it's a $1 beer, I pay a 10% VAT tax. So it's a little bit cumbersome, but it's what everybody else is doing all over the world except us. So and Senator Bill Bradley wrote the book on this, so go ahead and Google it. You might read some excerpts. It makes a lot of sense, a VAT tax instead of taxing, people's paychecks. So this essentially, if you work, it gives you a raise, and if you consume, it taxes you. So flat tax, VAT tax, Canadian health care, the inheritance tax, these kinds of ideas. So we'll elaborate more on these when my voice is working and I'm a little bit more on the ball. Hopefully soon. And I do appreciate you being here with me. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. Sorry. It's probably afternoon where you're at. I'm out here on the West Coast, so we're moving a little slow. But this is Marshall Gregory Thomas, your host, here at the 28th Amendment Tiny Concert Series. And we played you the song My Home, Right or Wrong, You can probably find that online, Marshall Gregory Thomas, My Home Right or Wrong. And we talked a little bit about the 28th Amendment, and we'll discuss that more later. And thank you. I hope you have a great day, and know that we love you.